Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room at Prince George, British Columbia. I did a video a few months ago, I believe it was in early August. It was about a sneaky declaration of war by Anzac. And it was a move that was done by a guy that goes by the name of Karl on AxisAndAllies.org. And had been playing a game against in Vancouver. I think Karl is from the Bay Area in Northern California, and Gargantua is from Vancouver, and they were playing a game in Vancouver. And Karl did this move against Gargantua, and the Gargantua wasn't very happy about it, and he didn't think it was right, and so they were posting in the forums, and they were looking for clarification: was this legal or not legal? And I got a good laugh out of it, and I made a video about it, and I decided to remake that video because I got something wrong in there, something terribly wrong. The gist of what I had said and everything, and what I showed in the video was right. It was just there was one aspect of it that was wrong, and so I wanted to correct that. Plus, there was some debate this week about things that were similar to that. And so I thought that I'll just remake that video, and I'll add the other stuff in. So in that video I said that we should name this move the Sneaky Karl, because it was Karl that had done this move, and he wasn't the first person to ever do the move, but you know, he was that's where I caught the attention of it anyway, and I think many people did for the first time ever. And it seems that name kind of stuck. Because for instance, I was at the Grasshopper Invitational, and I was playing at the table beside Gargantua, the guy who this move had been done to originally, and he comes over to my table and he says, "General Hand Grenade, I need you to come over in about 5 minutes. I'm about to do the sneaky Karl to these guys, and they're totally gonna not believe me. But you got to come over and you got to tell them it's a real rule, okay?" So sure, why not, you know? So then he calls me over like 5-10 minutes later, and I go over there, and these guys are just, "Who the fuck is Karl?" You know, like they were pissed off too, because I mean, it doesn't seem right. Like when you do this move, it doesn't seem right, and that's why I call it the Sneaky Karl, because it was Karl that did it, and it's really sneaky. Like it's a dirty move, right? So I'm gonna show you that right now. And that's what this series is all about. Know the rules. It's this series of videos that I'm doing, and it's about knowing the rule book inside and out. And you know, like the reason I'm remaking this video is you think you know the rule book, you know, like you go through it a million times, and then something else comes up, and oh, I didn't read this page, you know. So you had it all right except for this other page, and it just goes on and on. And especially transports. Like I'm gonna make a video about transports today, because this video about transports, because it just, like, the rules just go on and on and on about transports. You know, it's this way, except that there's ones, you know, it just goes on and on. Anyway, so let's take a look at the rule book here, and we got the Pacific rule book out, and this is page 13 of the Pacific rule book, and so it starts. At the top of the page here, it talks about sea units starting in hostile sea zones, and so that's what the Allies, specifically the UK and Anzac, are going to set up against Japan. Is they're going to create a hostile sea zone where these Japanese ships are right here. You see, there's a big group of Japanese ships, and right now Japan is only at war with China. They're not at war with any of the Western allies. So the UK and Anzac are going to, they know that Japan is just about to strike. They're all ready. Japan has just finished their turn, and they're about to strike on the next turn. You can tell because they're all ready. They've got 4 infantry and 4 artillery here, and they've got 4 transports here. So they're thinking they're either going to come down to the Mighty Islands, or maybe they're going to go over and they're going to sack Calcutta, one or the other. So, I mean, they could use blockers, but this is another thing that you could do if you set it up right. So, anyway, like it'll tell you all about it. And I'm not going to read this. I don't make these videos so I can sit there and read verbatim from page. I might read a passage or something, but this isn't very long, and I encourage you to read this on page 13 of the Japan book. And it's also, I don't know what page it's on in the Europe book, because they're slightly different, but they're usually in about the same order. But because there's a couple of different rules from each book, they might not be on the same page. And then on the next page here, on page 14, and it talks with powers not at war, because this is how you're going to set it up. You're going to move a UK boat into that fleet because they're not at war yet. And down here in movement, it says the power ships don't block the naval movement of other powers with which it's not at war, and vice versa. And this is the key phrase right here. They can occupy the same sea zones. So when you're not at war, you can be sitting in the same sea zone as your opponent, and so that's the key. And then on another page, way back at page 39, when we're doing the global rules here, and this talks about the Anzac, the political situation with Anzac, and it talks about them being at war with Germany and Italy, and they're on the other side of the world. And it says it can declare war on Japan at the beginning of the combat move phase of any of its turns, resulting in a state of war between Japan and both Anzac and the United Kingdom. And that's the key right there, is they can declare war, and then they will be at war with Japan, and so will the United Kingdom. And that's how you set up the sneaky Karl. So let's just get rid of this rule book here. Let's just move this out of the way. Okay, so like I said, the Japanese are ready to strike on the next turn, and you can tell. And unlike the last video, this video I decided to add in a naval base there, because that's something that I've been liking to do lately. And this guy's falling down on the job over here. So it's now the UK's turn. And so the UK is not at war with them, and the UK still has their boats over here. Now, one thing the UK could do, like they could bring a ship over here to Sea Zone 38, and that would block the Japanese fleet from coming, because they've got a naval base here. They could go 1, 2, 3 into Calcutta, right, or into what is that, Sea Zone 39, which they could take out Calcutta. But so you could put it there, or you could put it here. That would also block them from coming down there. But that doesn't block the Money Islands. See, they can also take the Money Islands if they'd like. That's another option to them. And these Money Islands are, if they took all 4 of them, and they have 4 transports here, and they've got enough stuff there, they could take all 4 Money Islands, and that would be worth 20 IPCs. Because if you add up the numbers, that's 15. Plus, if Japan has all 4 of them, then that's an extra 5 IPC bonus for them. It's a national objective, right? So that's 20 IPCs they could take, or they could take Calcutta from what they're doing right now. And like I said, you could block them, but this is another thing you could do. You could be sneaky like Karl from California there. So you could move this in here, because like we've seen on page 14 of the Rollbook, you can move your boat in there, and you can occupy the same space. Now, the UK could declare war on Japan right now when they do that, but that would just be silly, wouldn't it? That would be a furious battle that lasted nearly 2 seconds, right? As soon as Japan rolls the dice, then this guy's dead, so that wouldn't be a very good move. But you can move in there and just say, okay, I'm just going to sit here, and that'd be the end of it, right? So then the UK player's turn ends, and who's next? I guess it would be Italy. Italy would take their turn over there, and they do whatever they do, right? And then it's Anzac's turn. Now, Anzac does not have to attack anybody. They could if they want to. And you can see I haven't moved anything around in this game. I've just set a few things up. The board is set up in the starting setup. So I haven't moved anything around, but assume that some of this stuff has been moved around because we're a couple of turns in. Anzac, they don't have to attack anybody. They don't have to attack Japan. They don't have to do anything. All they have to do is at the start of their combat move, they say, I'm declaring war on Japan. And what that means is that not only will Anzac be at war, but now the UK is at war with Japan. So that creates a hostile sea zone. This sea zone here, let me just read what that is. Sea zone 36 is now a hostile sea zone. But it's not Japan's turn, and it's not UK's turn, so nothing happens right now. We have to wait until one of those players takes a turn, right? And so then we get to the next round. Germany goes, and then Russia goes, and then it's Japan's turn. Now Japan has to make a choice here with each of their boats. Like, they're going to purchase their units and stuff, but One mistake that they made here was that they didn't leave their stuff here, the infantry and the artillery on the transports. If they had left these things on the transports like this, then they could just ignore that destroyer there, that British destroyer. They could take their transports and they could take them over to Calcutta. Like they could fight these boats, and then they could do the amphibious assault, right? Or they could take each of those boats down to the Mighty Islands. They could attack because these things were already on there. But if you read the rule book and the page 13 that I was showing you in starting in a hostile sea zone, one of the things in that little blurb that was in there was that you can't load a transport in a hostile sea zone. And this wasn't hostile when this guy moved in here because they weren't at war. But then Anzac declared war on them, which meant that these guys are now at war with these guys. So now that it's these guys' turn, now that it's Japan's turn, and it's a hostile sea zone, they cannot load their transports. So that's one thing you need to consider when you're setting up as the Japan player, and you're bringing your transports down and you're about to declare war. This is if you didn't do a J1. If you did a J1, then none of this is going to happen, right? They're not going to have a chance to set this up on you. But if you're going J2 or J3 or something like that, then they could absolutely do this sneaky Karl move on you. So let's assume you didn't do a J1 and you came down here and you're sitting with your transports. You're going to have to think about that. Can these guys, like if these guys had their boats here and they've gone over here and they're fighting over here, then no problem. You don't have to worry about it. You can take all your stuff off of those transports and leave them there, because there's no way in the world that the UK is ever going to put a boat in there, right? But if that's not the case, if they do have ships that are within reach of you, then you're going to want to leave those units on your transports if you're planning on transporting them. I mean, if all they're going to do is they were just planning on fighting the Chinese, then of course you want them on the land, right? But if you were planning on moving on with those transports and those dudes and artillery, then you're going to want to leave them on the boat, because once he puts that destroyer there and Anzac declares war on you, now you can't load those transports. That's one of the stipulations in starting in a hostile sea zone like this one. So what can Japan do? Well, they have to do something. They can't just leave this to say, you know what, screw it, I'm not going to do anything. I'll just put my stuff on and attack the mainland and leave all this. They can't do that. This is a hostile sea zone, and so they have to rectify that situation. They can do a few different things. They could just, everybody stays there and they fight this destroyer, they beat the snot out of him and he's gone, right? But then none of them can make a non-combat move, because every one of them were involved in the combat. Even though transports don't have an attack value, if they're in a sea zone when there's a fight in the sea zone, every boat that's in that sea zone that's involved, all the British boats and all the Japanese boats are considered to be in that battle. Even if they don't have a shot in the battle, they're considered to be in that battle. So once this battle takes place, then none of these boats can move out afterwards. The planes could finish their movement, like they haven't gone any spaces, so they could still go 4 spaces on non-combat. But none of the boats can move out of here. And that's very important, because you won't be able to even do a non-combat move. And that was the thing that I had gotten wrong the first time that I did this video, was I didn't realize that you couldn't do the non-combat movement afterwards. I said you can't attack, but you could, but actually it's the other way around. You can attack. You just can't attack with these guys that are in this sea zone. What you could do, this is has a naval base, so you could move 3 spaces. So you could come up here with the transports, or one transport or whatever. You could pick up these dudes here, because this is not a hostile sea zone, number 20 here. So you could pick up these dudes, and then from here you could go 2 more spaces, right? So it's 1, and then you could go 2 and you could attack this, or you could go 3 and attack that. You could attack this. You know, like you could take more than 1 transport up there and pick up dudes and go 2 and then 3, or 3 and attack Malaysia, or 3, and you know, like you can go the movement that your boats can go. You can do an attack move from here. with one of the boats, with all of the boats, like all of these boats can leave and just leave the destroyer here, and nothing happens to that destroyer. Another thing you could do is you could just move some of the boats out. Like you could move these boats out, pick up those things up there, come over here, and come in here with these guys here, right? And come down with these guys. Like you went up there and picked up these guys, and then you got your bombardment shots here, and then these guys stay here and fight the destroyer. You could also do that, but you have to do that on combat move. Once the combat has begun here, you can't move anything out because everything is considered to have been in combat. So that's another thing you could do. But you have to do something. You can't just sit there. You have to either fight this guy or you have to leave. Because once non-combat comes around, like I said, then you can't leave because that was everybody was considering combat. So that's pretty sneaky, isn't it? Look, just going up there, you can screw somebody's transports from making a non-combat move, from picking up the guys he wants to pick up because he didn't want to pick up those other guys. He wanted to pick up these guys. His range is certainly down. Like if you take this naval base off, well, what can he do? Now he can go up here and he can come back, right? Or he could go here. But I mean, these guys could have walked over here anyway, right? So that doesn't do you any good. Really, probably the only viable thing that I would do in this situation, if it looked exactly like this, is I'd take these transports and I would move them all up to Japan. And then at least I could use them. Like I do that on combat move, and there's a stipulation that you can do that on your combat move. You can flee, and that's what those guys did. They fled the combat. They went up to Japan, and now on the following turn, they can pick up some Japanese ground units and they can come down, right? And then you could, there's a transport up there now. You could bring a transport down here after this battle was over on non-combat move and drop a couple more guys in there. But that's what I would do in this case is just get rid of those transports. They're not going to do you any good. You can't use them on non-combat. Yeah, unless, like you wanted to keep them here because you say, no, okay, you screwed me that time. Shame on you, ha, ha, ha. That was pretty funny. Next turn, I'm coming after you, and just leave them here, take this guy out. And on the following turn, then you've got these guys, and then you go and you do your attacks, right? That's another thing that you can obviously do. Like you could leave most of them in there and still come over here with these guys and attack, right? You could come down with a bunch of other boats down here. Like come over here with all your warships and come over and take those guys, and then come down with a bunch of warships here and take out the destroyer down here. Where'd he go? Oh, I already took him off. You come down here, take the destroyer, but still leave these guys here. And then on the following turn, then you can bring your boats over. Like you can do a lot of things. But what you can't do is pick up these dudes or non-combat move anything out of there. Everything has to be done on the combat move. So that is the sneaky Karl. And thanks to Karl for bringing that to everybody's attention. Now everybody's sneaky Karl and each other. Way to go, Karl. Anyway, so that's one thing you can do to screw people's transports. And I'm going to show you a couple other things. I'm just give me a couple minutes to set it up, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I set some other things up here. I want to show you another way that you could screw a transport out of some of its movement. Not all of it, but some of it. And before I do, though, this is Europe Rollbook here. So I want to show you that article, Seen It Starting in a Hostile Sea Zone. It begins on page 13 of the Europe Rollbook, and it ends at the top of the page on page 14. And it's not that long, but it's a very specific rule, and there's a few things involved in it. I don't use this book much because this is the one that Larry Harris signed for me in Toronto. So anyway, I like to keep that in plastic. Anyway, let's put that aside before I spill anything on it here. Okay, so somebody on the forums was they had posed a question. Actually, they made a statement. They said, from what my understanding is, this is what it means about hostile sea zones and stuff. And they actually had it, I think, correct, 100% correct, if I'm not mistaken. So the guy had it correct, and then other people, wait a minute, this, that, whatever, and asking other questions, and there still seems to be quite a bit of confusion on transports. And like I said earlier in the video, transports are very confusing, probably the most confusing unit in the whole game, because there's so many intricacies about them. So let's set up another situation here. So in C-Zone 115 here, it borders Leningrad, so it's a pretty important C-zone here. Now Germany, the first time they declare war on Russia, this is what they've got, and I'm just setting this up. And another way I've set this up is I'm saying that Germany did not attack C-Zone 111 here, and so therefore they were able to save those boats, and they put them down there in C-Zone 109 with the other two boats that start in C-Zone 109, and that's kind of important. That's the whole reason why Russia would do the move that they're about to do here. So the Russians on the Germany's turn, the Germans, they take out these Russian boats, and they have these two transports as well, and they move all their stuff in here, right? They took them out, and with these two transports, they drop off these four things. Let's say they attack this and take this out, right? Let's say they lose one of their dudes doing it, but they come in there and they have the two tanks. Okay, so that's their turn. Then they've done other things as well. Like they've gone down here and they've attacked Russia for the first time. So they've attacked along the line here, and I'm not sure what I would have done. I don't know where the defense was and stuff. But they've come and they're starting their major offensive against Russia. And this is just an example. And it's only the boats that we're concerned with. We're not concerned with what's going on in the land here. And we had to be mindful of how many planes that were in here. And I've done a video on that before in regards to scrambling, because we had to make sure we had enough boats in here, because they had two boats as well, right? And so we had to make sure that they couldn't scramble and take out all the German boats when we were going in there. And that wasn't the case. They only had the one plane in there, and so they didn't scramble that plane. Now the Russian turn comes along, and what do you think the Russians do? So they make their purchases and stuff. And one of the things they purchase, curiously, to the German player, is they purchase a destroyer. And the German players would think, what the hell did they buy a destroyer for? So they take their turn. Maybe they do some counterattacks or something down there, right? They do whatever they do, and they're placing their units, and they place the destroyer right here. Now, if you go into the rule book there, and geez, I should have looked at what page it was. But anyway, you can place units. I think it's actually the same one with the hostile Z-zone. If it's not there, it's in where you place your units, where you're allowed to place your units. Now, there's an industrial complex here. And so, and that borders this C-zone. You can place your C units in any C-zone that borders your industrial complex, as long as your complex isn't damaged to the point where you can't place anything. But the reason that rule is so that, you can't just take one German boat and put them here, and one German boat and put them over here in this other spot over here. So then the Russians could never possibly build a boat, right? You can always place in a place in C-zone adjacent to where you have an industrial complex, regardless of how many boats are already in there. You can still place yours in there. And these guys did it for a reason. They wanted to screw these transports. They were talking with the British player, and they've come up with a plan. This is off now. So they've come up with some sort of plan, and the German player scratching their head thinking, what the hell? Why did he do that, right? Okay, so then the UK player takes their turn, and now things start to come into focus for them, because they buy a couple of transports. Oh, and I already put these on. They buy a couple of transports, and they buy 3 tanks, and they put them on. I had already had them on there, sorry about that. So anyway, now they've got a navy that has transport capacity, and you see that there's planes here, and you think, well, these guys should just come over here. But remember, these planes were over here. They're not quite set up right for this scenario, but they're over here. They're taking part in Barbarossa, so they're not really able to assault this. And let's assume that there isn't enough planes and boats for the Germans to assault this space. Otherwise, the Russians would have never bought that destroyer in the first place, right? We're trying to set up a scenario where these boats we're pretty certain are going to survive till the next turn. So they do that, and then the Germans are going, oh, because we're looking at this space over here, and there's only one guy here. So there's only one thing that the Germans can do to stop, or at least to try to stop the UK from coming to Norway, and that is to move these guys back, because when they take their turn, and you remember with the sneaky Karl move there, there's no possible way that these transports, and there's no other transports in here, there's no possible way with these transports starting in a hostile Z-zone that they're going to be able to make a non-combat move. They can make a combat move, like they could go out here, they could pick up stuff, they could come back, they could assault this, they could assault this. Let's see, this 1, 2. No, that's the only two things they could possibly do, is they could assault this guy or they could assault this guy. That's the only things they could do. Or they could just simply move out and do nothing. That's another thing that they could do if they wanted. And then these guys could assault the destroyer. But they have to do something. They have either these boats all have to move out, or one or all of them have to assault this destroyer. And so let's say these guys move out and these guys assault the destroyer, and that's the way it goes. And again, you got to remember about can they scramble? Because if they could, then you got to make sure that you have enough boats in there if you decide to take on that destroyer. You don't want to just be cocky about it. And they had 3 planes in here, and I only need 1 destroyer to take that out, right? And next thing you know, you're rolling against a whole bunch of planes, right? So the German players shaking their head, thinking, "Geez, I should have planned that out better." So I think probably what I would have done was I would have taken this guy out here to protect those destroyers. So now the British player goes and he takes all his crap here and he moves them all up here to sea zone 125. And he drops all this stuff down. He's got 3 transports worth, and I would have done this regardless of whether or not he decided to move these things back from Finland, right? Because you've got all these planes here as well that could come up here. Let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess they couldn't have done it from there. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so I guess they couldn't use it, but they could have if they had if they had a strategic bomber up there. Still, they could. Actually, they could do it if they wanted to land the fighters here. Like they could come up here and attack this, and then land the fighters here if they want, and then on Russia's turn, move up there. Or if they were thinking about it ahead of time, the Russians could have come up here like this, because they knew they were going to do that move, right? So the Russians could have came up there like that, and then the British go and they take this out, and then they land their fighters there. But the funny thing is though, that 1 destroyer stopped these guys, and they could have had 10 transports here, right? And come down. There was no way that they could come down here and pick up stuff and drop it on Norway or Finland for that matter, because those would have been non-combat moves, and you can't make a non-combat move starting in a hostile sea zone. So it really makes a difference when you do that, doesn't it? And it only costs you 8 IPCs to buy that destroyer. Now you could do this same move with a battleship, but a battleship costs 20 IPCs, and then it's not worth it anymore, is it? Norway's just not worth because you're eventually going to lose that stuff anyway. It's just, you were taking that money off Norway and you were forcing the Germans to turn around. Anytime you can force them to turn around as they're going into Russia and attack backwards, then you're delaying them until the Americans can make more headway in the war, right? But there's another scenario though, like in this case you bought a destroyer. Now a submarine is cheaper. It's only 6 IPCs. Now if you had bought a submarine and all this stuff was still in there, now the Germans can decide they want to ignore this submarine. They don't have to attack this submarine. They can still use these to do a non-combat move. They could do a combat move, they could do a non-combat move, they could do anything they want, as long as nobody picks a fight with this submarine. Nobody whips out their camera and yells out, "World Star," and starts chucking knuckles. They can do whatever they want with their boats. Or they could do they could do what they did with the destroyer. If they didn't need to make a non-combat move, like if they were planning on making a combat move anyway with these things, then they'd come back, grab some shit, and come back and attack whatever they were going to attack, and attack the sub as well if they wanted to. But if it's a submarine or a transport, it could be a Russian transport, although you wouldn't purchase a Russian transport and put it here. But in somewhere else on the board, if there just happened to be a transport there, you could choose to ignore a submarine or a transport, but you could not ignore a different type of warship, whether that's a destroyer or a cruiser or a battleship or an aircraft carrier. You can't ignore those type of boats. You have to either flee or fight when you're starting in a hostile sea zone, like sea zone 115 is at this particular moment here for the Germans. They started this, the Russians didn't start it in a hostile sea zone. They created it by placing this on the last thing they did. So it's not their turn now, right? They place that thing, it's not their turn, so the sea zone's not hostile for them. But on the German turn, it is hostile because they're starting that way. So that's another way you can screw screw transports. And there is one more case that you could screw a transport here. And let's use a submarine this time. So let's say that a lot of battles have happened in here, and there's no more German boats, and but they do have a bunch of transports. Now, this isn't here. Okay, so the Germans go and they have a bunch of transports, and well, they buy a bunch of transports. Now the Russians going, oh geez, now they can just take all their stuff back here and they can skate up here to Leningrad and they could take me out, right? But all you need to do is buy a transport this time. It doesn't work if you buy in that destroyer if this is the case. Because you're not making a sea zone hostile, so that's not doing you any good. And I'll show you why. If you put a submarine down and the Germans don't have any other boats except for transports, well, now you've prevented those transports from attacking this space here, because you can't go in here with a transport and do an amphibious assault in the presence of a submarine. Because it's just against the rules. It's a hostile sea zone to transports. If you had even one boat, doesn't matter what kind of warship, it could be even a submarine for that matter. But let's say it's a cruiser. You could come in like this. You could now ignore this submarine, pretend that submarine doesn't even exist, and you could drop all your stuff off in there. I don't know that I would do that, because then on Russia's turn, then they could attack that, and if they take them out, then all these transports are dead. But let's say instead it was a destroyer. There, that looks a little bit better. At least the destroyer can defend himself now. Anyway, so that's interesting, isn't it? That a submarine would be better in that situation. But that's an unusual situation. It probably not so unusual, say, like if you're fighting over the islands down there in the Pacific, to have a lone transport or two traveling around and wanting to take an island out. All you need is a submarine out there. And submarines are not susceptible to planes. So you look around here, and if this was gone, then there's no planes, there's no boats, no German boats except for the transports. Well, these planes can't come in here and shoot this sub because they can't see them, right? So that's why that sub is more effective than a destroyer in this case. If instead you had the destroyer there, then the plane just comes in and it kills the destroyer, and these guys move in, drop their cargo off, so the destroyer doesn't work in that case, but the sub does. So like I said, you really got to read the transport rules, because there's so many different things to do with transports. And if you want to be a successful player, if you want to win lots of games and everything, it really helps if you know these rules inside and out, because there's just slight little nuances and everything, little things that you can do to stop even a big stack of transports with a big stack of dudes and a big stack of tanks. All you need is one $6 submarine. Or maybe what you need instead is one destroyer placed in the right spot to create a hostile sea zone. It's just, there's so many little things that you can do But I encourage you to read the rule book, know the rules, and use the rules to your advantage. It'll make you a much, much better player. So that's all I got today. That's the sneaky Karl and other ways to bone a transport, for lack of a better way to put it. This is General Hand Grenade, everybody. Take care.